Okay. Okay. Well, finally, it has happened. Charles Leclerc has won the Monaco Grand Prix. I'm not going to come with any sort of fancy or sort of like witty introductions. That's all I've got to say. Leclerc's won his home race. Welcome to Good Talk. My name is Tom Downey, and here today we are going to discuss the 2024 Monaco Grand Prix. Joining me, we have who are you, George? You are George Howson, and you are the OG brains behind Grid Talk. Hello, sir.
Evening, Tom. Yes, that's who I am.
Yes, yeah, I know. I'm pretty happy that Leclerc won, as you might be able to figure out. And also joining us is Grid Talk co-host again, Owain Medford.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Just before we get into this episode, we must thank our sponsor, Bet Online. Bet Online is your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from MLB, golf, NBA, and NHL playoff stats. All the latest stats, news, and scores are available to follow for your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts. Also, please be sure to use our new socials at Grid Talk UK to stay up to date with the show. So now that the sort of housekeeping is out of the way, George, you said it in the intro. Charles Leclerc, 2024 Monaco Grand Prix victor. It's his home race. He dedicated the race to his dad at the end, which is a really, really touching moment. And yeah, I mean, over to you.
Yeah, it was great. It was great to see him do that, and you could tell he was really holding back the tears while he was saying it too, how much it really meant to him. I mean, to win around your home track after all this time, after everything that's happened to him. He's had pole in the past and not been able to start. He's been in the lead before, and Ferrari botched the strategy. He's had everything go wrong over the years. He's never won in Monaco in any category, I don't believe, before today, and he's never done it. He's certainly never done it in F1. So I'm so happy he's done it. Absolutely, it's great for him. It's great. It's great for Formula One as well, just to get another winner in there. That's the fourth different winner we've had this season, which isn't too bad at this stage of the season when you think about it. And yeah, I mean, he set an amazing pole time yesterday. He took the lead in both starts, both the start and the restart after the red flag. And yeah, he did. He did. I mean, they covered it in commentary. I think Martin Brundle said it. Alan Prost in particular used to win the race by the smallest possible margin. I think for the most part for this race, that's what he was doing. He was doing just enough to keep Oscar Piastri behind. Oscar Piastri was, eating his tires up, but then in the last stages, Charles Leclerc just absolutely went for it and ended up winning by over 7 seconds. And I think at a time he was about 10 seconds ahead of second as well. So fantastic for him, a complete performance, a complete weekend for him. And and you never know that could really give him a massive boost, in particular for Ferrari. So yeah, I'm so happy it's finally happened for him. And if anybody deserves to win the home race, it's definitely Charles Leclerc, and he's proved it today.
Absolutely. This is what, third time lucky for Leclerc, I believe, because he's had a DNF and a DNS round here before, and then he finished sixth, I believe, or maybe fourth in 2022, and then last year, I'm very certain he was on the podium. I could be getting my years wrong, but he said that a podium will not be enough. He said he wants to win. He said he has to win, and he's done it. And yeah, it's put him second in the constructors. He's on 138 points. He's ahead of Lando, who's on 113, and he is obviously behind Max, who's on 169 points. But also for the constructors, this bumps Ferrari up to second with 252 points, where they are only marginally behind Red Bull, who are on 276. So, at the start of the year, we were sort of bemoaning Red Bull for sort of romping away with a win in Bahrain, and then Saudi looking much the same. But it looks like our prayers might have been answered this year. Someone whose prayers weren't answered, Owain, in this race was Sergio Perez. Now, we'll get onto that incident in a bit, as that's a talking point in itself. But we had a red flag on lap one due to the incident between Perez and both Haas drivers, mainly Magnussen. But like I said, we'll talk about that in a bit. Do you think that the red flag sort of hindered the race today? Because we saw drivers who had started on the mediums, they swapped to the hards, such as the top four, and then they just didn't pit for the entirety of the race and just drove around for 76 laps and brought it home.
I think one of the reasons that we didn't get a Grand Slam out of Charles Leclerc there was because they were for the majority of the Grand Prix, we're talking 60 laps or so, and possibly even longer. We had drivers nursing their tires. I mean, that was very clearly what the top four were doing. Leclerc was, obviously driving around at, at the minimum speed possible to not get overtaken, and which is obviously quite slow around Monaco, and prevent Norris from having any kind of gap that would sorry, and prevent him from opening up any kind of gap that would allow Norris to start applying pressure in any meaningful way. And similarly with Russell, and Russell was not driving around particularly quickly. He had an even bigger problem, in that he had the medium tires, as did Verstappen and Hamilton behind him. So they were all nursing their tires, and this just isn't a circuit that necessarily, it's not a high downforce circuit. It's a high wing angle circuit, but it's not a high downforce circuit. It's not particularly quick, so there's not a chance of you sort of washing wide in the wake so much as there is at other tracks. And as a result of that, they just cut, all the drivers just sort of backed off and nursed their cars to the finish line. I mean, we saw a little bit of the pit stops, and that's really shows what I think was maybe the saving grace, or sort of the counterpoint, which is that even with new hard tires that he was pounding around on, or very lightly used hard tires that he was pounding around on, and that with something like a 50-lap tire deficit, Max Verstappen, in what is what we call the fastest car on the grid. Obviously, it seemed to be a little slower. It doesn't seem to suit Monaco this so well, and Monaco seems to take away its advantages. But Max Verstappen could not get past George Russell as a result, funnily enough, of the tyre saving. So I think what it did do was it robbed us of the chance for drivers to make a mistake from pushing very, very quickly. From pushing too hard and trying to drive quickly. But I think there's sort of it did sort of change the race in such a way that we didn't really get that. So I don't think it. I think it did sort of ruin the race a little bit. But and therefore it made it a lot easier for Charles.
Yeah, it whilst it on paper may have looked sort of plain sailing for Leclerc. Obviously, he led every lap and brought it home for the victory. He still had to get off the line, and he still had to hold the lead into turn one and hold his nerve. And you said it yourself, he did just enough to keep the win. And we saw that pay dividends, because George mentioned earlier, we saw Piastri ultimately burn up his tyres a little bit. And then we saw Leclerc just pull away victorious. And that left, well, to be honest, that left Piastri almost exposed to losing P2 to Sainz. And in my head, I was thinking, when was the last time we had a Ferrari 1-2? And it was, I think it was some point in 2022, but I can't quite remember. But let's have a look at some of the incidents that happened in this race, because let's be real, that was about the only thing on that one. This is about all that did happen in this race, because it wasn't a classic, let's be real. But one thing that was classic was the Alpines running into each other once again. So as on that one, after we'd had all the shenanigans of turn 3 through Mirabeau, we then got greeted with the lovely sight of the two Alpines just running into the back of each other. And then Stroll, for good measure, said, "Oh, I need a piece of that," and then also got involved, apparently. Although I didn't see that. I wouldn't be surprised if he did. George, we heard some rather stern words from Bruno Famin, the Alpine team principal. It translated to some form of basically Ocon needs to basically check himself before he wrecks himself. That's a slight paraphrase, but it's safe to say that the Alpine camp, after their torrid start to the year, do you think they perhaps missed an opportunity today? And what do you think will happen with the two drivers running into each other?
I'm not sure if they missed a big opportunity today. I mean, Gasly still brought it home in 10th, still got a point. It would have been difficult for Ocon to really get much out of it. I mean, we didn't have much passing today, like you said. And you know, it's important because it was at the restart, and you know that is often your best chance to pass around Monaco. Everybody's tires are warming up, the brakes are warming up. No one's really in a rhythm at that point, so you can take advantage usually. But the one golden rule in racing, you don't hit your teammate. And that's what Ocon did, and it was absolutely embarrassing. Now we know that these guys don't like each other. We know they've got history and previous. I think I actually explained it in Drive to Survive. You know, a differing of opinion about an incident all the way back in karting, and I am absolutely sure that Pierre and Esteban have differing opinions on this incident. But the fact is that Ocon tried to close a gap where his teammate was, and Ocon flew up in the air, was out of the race. Ocon's got a 3 grid place penalty for the next race in Canada, but the real penalty for him is going to be with his team, you know, going off of what Famin said. And obviously, I'm sure it was directly translated from French, but it sounds to me as though Ocon's contract is not going to be renewed for next year. And some people even thinking that, well, maybe they're going to drop him for a race. I don't think they will. I don't think they will. But there's going to be a very, very stern talking to by them. And Famin, of course, is new in this role. He needs to lay down his authority in the team. He can't, you know, he can't let things like that slide. It's actually 5 places for Ocon. To be honest with you, he's lucky it couldn't be more because it's a really, really bad incident. It's poor driving. If the likes of Lance Stroll did that, for example, we'd all be calling for them to, you know, get disqualification or whatever. So it was really bad by Ocon. But yeah, he's got, you know, Famin's really got to lay down his authority in the team, and he can't let things like that stand. And quite frankly, you know, yeah, it's a bad one for sure. So I think we could well see Ocon moving on. There's rumours about him going to Mercedes potentially. At least there was anyway. I don't think there's going to be many rumours about that now after that. So I am get the popcorn out, lads. It's going to be interesting watching what happens with Alpine going forward because fuel has definitely been added to that fire.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, let's not forget that Toto Wolff used to be Ocon's manager back in the day. So, you know, while, you know, even if it's not a link now, it certainly used to be a link. And, you know, you've got to use the connections in these fields. And of course, Ocon used to be a Mercedes Junior driver. And, you know, but then you've got to ask the question, would you want to go there for 1 or 2 years to keep the seat warm for Antonelli? So plenty of questions to be asked there. You know, there's it from what Bruno Famin said, it definitely looks like Ocon might be moving on from Team Alpine, and then hopefully we see Jack Doohan on the grid. Because that would most likely keep our resident Aussie Joward very happy as well. You know, because we would still have 2 drivers on the grid. Because I maintain Daniel Ricciardo will not be on the grid next year. But anyway, you know, speaking of disappointments, Owain Perez. He had a bit of an issue with the Haas drivers on turn one. Now I say that a bit tongue in cheek because certainly in my eyes, Perez didn't do anything wrong. You know, he was just keeping his nose clean out of danger. And then K-Mag tried to have a look at the inside on the right. Perhaps didn't realise that the track sort of follows that natural curvature, especially with it being Monaco is that tight. He his front left made contact with the right rear Perez, spun his car into the wall, and then just absolute carnage ensued. Do you just want to give us your thoughts, perhaps a little bit on that on that whole incident and then the outcome of it as well?
For me, I don't think. I mean, obviously Hulkenberg is not to blame as the third driver in the collision that went out. And I don't think Perez is either. Now, Beau Rivage is a bit difficult as a court, you know, as a sort of as a straight. Really, it's not a straight. It's a series of very gentle corners that we don't treat as corners. And I personally think that Magnussen is very, very lucky to be not getting a penalty or to be getting no penalty for this kind of for the incident. And as much as I don't think, I think he's flirting with the line for causing a collision. For me, we know that it's it's yeah. It's for me, sort of an unneeded incident, and I think Perez maybe could have left a little more room. But the fact is, it took all three drivers out of the race. There's a huge, in one accident, there's probably 20 million, $30 million dollars worth of damage, and I don't think Perez should have been there. I think it was a bad weekend in general. Yeah, it's a bad weekend in general, I think, for him. And I think it's one of those things. It's yet another thing where we sit there and think, for a driver who's supposedly king of the street, should he have really been, should he really be getting a contract extension or anything like that when there are other drivers to choose from, probably from F2, or even elsewhere on this grid. And I think he could have got out of the way. I think you need to sort of, I think they all maybe could have had a little bit of fight for another day. I know it's Monaco. I know it's the first lap. I know it's your only real chance to get ahead, but that caused, it caused a completely unnecessary incident. And the only person I can think is to blame is K-Mag, personally. I know we're going to go into a little bit more depth, but I think Perez could have, like I say, Perez could have left a little bit more room, but I don't think it's entirely his job to leave all the room. I think he's unfortunately, him and Magnussen have been an unlucky bystanders there.
No, that's a very, very fair point, and I'll like you says, and like I said, we'll go into it a bit later on, but yeah, not the best driving from some of the oldest drivers and some of the most experienced drivers on the grid. The only two I think who are older are Hamilton and Alonso. I can't think of because most of the other drivers are sort of out in nappies these days. Oh, Danny Rick, but he should be in a retirement home. But yeah, sort of looking at some other incidents in this race, George, we saw not under investigation, but noted by the stewards, an incident between Piastri and Sainz into turn one. So this was on the first lap. So this is the first standing start that we had. So this is the race start, not the red flag restart. We saw Piastri obviously started second both times round. He left room to his right, and Sainz had arguably a better start than him. Sainz had a little look into Saint Devot, and then Piastri committed to sort of keeping hold of the position around the outside. A little bit of contact ensued, and that ultimately led to what certainly appeared to be a puncture for Sainz, and he went off at the hairpin. Somewhat saved by the red flag, one could say, because he effectively got away with it. Bearing in mind, we saw Ocon get a penalty for his collision with Gasly, and then we saw nothing for Kevin Magnussen and his collision with Perez. Do you think? Oh God, how do I phrase this with a sort of without sounding like one of the sort of tinfoil hat people? Do you think the stewards maybe drop the ball a bit here? And once again, are we perhaps highlighting some inconsistencies? Within the stewarding this time, even just during a single race event.
I mean, there's definitely inconsistency with the stewards through these incidents for sure. I don't think that's a conspiracy theory in it all. No, I think there's a lot of problems with what they've done and what they haven't done. I mean, I think Ocon absolutely should get the penalty that he did. I think that was right when we covered that one before. I mean, again, we'll go into it more in a bit, but I think K-Mag is unbelievably lucky not to get the penalty for what he did. But yeah, we'll cover that more in a bit. With the Piastri and the Sainz one, it's an interesting one. So Sainz, obviously, he started on the cleaner side of the grid. He attacked Lando Norris into the first corner. He got a good start. And then there was contact between Piastri and Sainz, and Sainz got the puncture. Now, this is the first corner compared to Ocon and Gasly, where it was like the back end of the track. So it's not a first corner incident when it was the two Alpines. This was a first corner incident. You've also got to take into account the type of corner this is. Now, I'm lucky enough to have been to Monaco, and I can guarantee that hill climb to the casino is extremely steep. Much steeper than it looks like on the cameras with the cars. It's also a very, very, even for Monaco standards, a very, very narrow part of the track. And it's also a part where you are desperately looking to go as fast as possible up to the run into the casino. Whereas at the Portiere, it's two very slow right-handers. So I understand why the stewards didn't give a penalty for that between them. I feel like it was a bit of first corner incidents, a bit of 6-1, half a dozen the other. Um, but what is absolutely not in doubt, like you said, Tom, is the fact that Sainz got incredibly lucky with that. He was out of the race, no doubt, if it wasn't for the red flag. And if the red flag came a little earlier, I believe that they would have had to go for a rolling start, which would have meant that he wouldn't be able to restart. So he got very, very lucky on in a number of factors there. But I personally don't have a problem with the Piastri and Sainz incident not getting a penalty. I have much more of a problem with K-Mag not getting a penalty for his incident. But yeah, I think you're right. I don't think it's a conspiracy theory to suggest that the stewards are inconsistent. People who follow Formula One like we do, and like a lot of our listeners and viewers do, know that this is not new. The stewards are very inconsistent from race to race, and in this case, even in the same race. So it's baffling, really.
Yeah, I'm glad you understood what I was getting at, because what I was trying to say was is this sort of like, just, I don't even know what to start. I'm just gonna move on, because I'm gonna end up ripping into the stewards, and yeah, I'm gonna get clipped. Owain, one of the things we sort of mentioned earlier was the red flag, and I give you this topic actually. The red flag did somewhat ruin any form of any real race. Now, obviously, as Monaco, you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because the streets are incredibly narrow, the cars are very wide, yada yada yada. We didn't see any change in the top 10 today. Now, do you think this, plus when you sort of think about DRS down the one straight that we have, doesn't really seem to be that effective? Do you think that there's anything that can be done for Monaco? Bearing in mind that the top 10 order didn't change, and the sort of the bottom 10 only changed a little bit, due to some DNFs, and then one or two actual on-track overtakes, which did wake me up. Do you think there's anything that can be done for Monaco, or do you think it's just the characteristics of the circuit?
No, I think what we've maybe noticed, if you go back and watch previous Monaco Grand Prix, where the cars were, I mean, right, for me, it's the size of the cars. It's fundamentally the size of the cars. And I don't think this particular form of like a street circuit for a ground effect car. I haven't looked too far into the previous era of ground effect cars, but we're dealing with a different era entirely. What with not using skirts and instead using sort of air to seal the floor, which the teams are relatively good at. I think for me, the fact is that the cars are large. The cars are too big, and they're too bulky. You can't. That they are, and they're too heavy. You're taking a car which, even with the maximum wheelbase now, if you take the current Mercedes, it is about the same size as a Maybach. It's 5.5 meters long. It's 2 meters wide. It weighs 900 kilos. And I know that's fairly dainty, and it's got a lot more grip than a Maybach, in terms of weight. But it's still, and it's obviously got several tons more downforce. But at a certain point, it's quite difficult to maneuver that quickly around the circuit. You try, if you're in a standard road car, even with all the horsepower in the world, you would never go for an overtake down any of Monaco's streets. And I think in some ways, I mean, I've got nothing to back this up from an engineering point of view, but I would look at it and I'd just say that, well, as the gaps get closer, you're starting to need larger and larger. The deltas that we're needing. We're in excess of, must be in excess of 2 seconds. Bearing in mind that Max Verstappen had 2 seconds a lap for quicker tires at one point than George Russell. And as much as George Russell had saved his tires and was able to, maybe nurse that gap down a bit. The delta that you need is now so large that you have to practically be alongside by the time of the acceleration zones at Monaco to even get past. And I think as much as yes, it is easier to follow it, that it doesn't get away from the thermal problem of these cars are now so, it ruins your tires and it ruins your brakes. So there's no way of you sending a move down in Saint Devote. The only time we ever saw it was Lance Stroll on Sargent, I believe, sending it up the inside and doing a quick switchback. But I think that was as a result more of, like I say, the tyre deficit of Logan Sargent rather than anything to do with the ability of either of those drivers, really. So I think I'm not sure there's anything we can do about it. Unfortunately, the top 10 is now so close that there is no deficit, there is no change, and you'd have to have one of those guys having an issue in qualifying to get them out of position and have them, having to fight through the field, and it just doesn't happen anymore. The scope isn't there. So I think it's just one of those things that I think we're at the point now where Monaco is its own race, and yes, it's difficult. Yes, it's we saw you can still make mistakes and you can still hit the walls, and that's easier to do now that the cars are 2 meters wide. But I just think that if we slim down, if we found a way to slim down the cars, if possible. I mean, we're hoping against hope for technology here because it's been 10 years of hybrid racing. Something like, what was it, 7 with these much physically larger cars, but you just cannot get past, and I think it's a size issue more than anything. You can't dance a car around the streets of Monaco on the throttle anymore. It just doesn't happen, and the teams know that, and they rather than sort of rather than burn their tires up or anything, they just go, right, we'll manage the tires, and that's it, because they know the penalty of not doing that. I think that's what we have here, and I don't know how any way we could solve it. Apart from implement things that for example, Lewis Hamilton suggested, such as special tires or anything like that, or mandatory 2-stops. I think you need weather or something to make Monaco interesting, and we just don't have that anymore.
Yeah, no, very, very good point, Owain, and especially you said about either a mandatory pit stop or or having some form of some form of weather, because we saw the last 2 previous Monaco Grand Prix, 2023 and 2022, were rain affected races, and we've seen sort of like just how good a race that can make it, but no, it's yeah, there's not much you can do, and you said it yourself, wishing for technology against technology's sake. When the cars are not going to go back to sort of what they were previously, and especially with all the updated security features and the hybrid systems and all the rest of it, they are smaller than the sort of 2017 era cars, but they're still, like you said, they're like the size of a Maybach, which is not a small car. But yeah, that's certainly it for sort of like individuals, so like panelists and panelists bit. But one thing, and I think you probably both know why I'm going to go with this, is this is pretty much not the only, but it is the main talking point from the race. K-Mag and the incident. Now, we've all seen the onboards, we've all seen, where his front axle was in relation to Perez's rear axle. Do you think he deserves a penalty for that? What I mean is, what I also sort of going to ask in this is, we need to take out the equation. We need to take out the equation. He's only 2 or 3 points away from a race ban. Let's just focus solely on the one incident. And George, if you want to go first, and then Owain, you go after. If you just have a discussion between the 3 of us about it, I really not bothered either way. Do you think Magnussen's actions today warranted a penalty?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have any doubt about that, to be honest. I mean, for me personally, I think he should have already had a race ban for what he did in the sprint in Miami, personally, the way he acted in that. But he didn't obviously do that. They gave him a lot of penalty points for it. And you look at today's incident, I think the only thing that you could possibly say that saves Magnussen on this, or should save Magnussen, I should say, is the fact that there is room to the left of Sergio Perez. There is some room there. If Perez moves to the left, there is room for Magnussen. But, unlike what Ayrton Senna says, sometimes you shouldn't go for a gap. Sometimes it's not worth it. They were battling over 17th place on the first corner of the first lap of Monaco. And K-Mag is going for that like he's going for a race win or some points maybe, which would be huge for Haas. But no, they're battling over 17th. And he's battling a car that even if he overtakes him, as much as we, have a go at Perez and everything, as much as we have a go at him, he's trying to overtake a car that would be absolutely, in a best case scenario, absolutely just on his gearbox for 78 laps. Like, what's that going to achieve? What's that going to do? And what happened instead is that you have a very scary crash. I mean, there was barely anything left of Perez's car. Like, they didn't show it at first. I didn't realize it happened until they actually went back to the drivers and showed them on the track. I didn't actually see a crash at first. Maybe because they were thinking, oh God, this could be quite a nasty one, like they didn't show Zhou Guanyu at Silverstone a couple of years ago, because there was a chance he might not have walked away from that one. Thankfully, Perez did, and he seemed all right. But yeah, a really scary crash in a fast part of the track. And as well, I think you could touch on it as well, Owain. That's 30, 40 million dollars worth of damage or whatever for Haas. That's two cars destroyed in a cost cap era for a team that's struggling. All right, they're doing all right with the results relatively, but this really might bite them. Might mean that they can't, develop cars for the rest of the year or for a significant time. So it's got far-reaching consequences beyond just the crash itself. So yeah, I am shocked that he's not got a penalty personally, and controversial opinion I know, but I feel like the fact that if he got 2 points on his super license, he would get a race ban. I feel like they did probably weigh on the stewards. I think for a lack of better term, they bottled it. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my opinion in a moment. Owen, what do you think about the? I was going to say Perez penalty. No, he penalised himself by qualifying P17. What do you think about the Magnussen lack of penalty?
Um, I mean, I'll answer that question. I think it's very similar to in a football match when you see, a player get a yellow, an initial yellow, and then they do another challenge later on, and it by rights, if you took that later challenge in isolation, you'd go that's a yellow card. But it's not. It doesn't seem big enough to give a full. It doesn't seem big enough to give a full. Sorry, it doesn't seem big enough with the added implication that it's going to cause us. It's going to be two yellows on the trot in one match, and that means it's a red card. I think that's sort of what's going on here. I've explained that really, really badly, but you do get that sense on occasion that maybe they just didn't want to give a race ban. And for me, as an incident, I genuinely think, given the penalty that Esteban Ocon got, which was on his own team, and I know that shouldn't mean that on his own teammate, and I know that shouldn't make a difference to how it's counted, but I feel like it is. I think if we were to go back, through the incidents that we've seen over the years, typically those are more lenient because obviously it should be internal. Lewis Hamilton, for example, I mean, it's a relatively similar incident, but Lewis Hamilton, I don't believe, got a penalty or anything for what happened at Canada 2011. That was team on team, and I genuinely don't think that the Ocon incident is as bad. I think he just moves. I think he moves across, and he doesn't. Ocon was so eager to get ahead of Gasly that he moved across left when he should have really squared the car up more. But Magnus on the other hand had two cars behind him, only one directly behind in the form of Zhou, and yet he kept his foot in. And as you say, it wasn't for a race win. This was for 17th place on the first lap of the Monaco Grand Prix. And a race where anything can happen. Just taking it in isolation, I think by the letter of the law, that is causing a collision. As you say, George, he's possibly saved by the fact that Perez could have been further left. But the fact is, not to go on about the Ayrton Senna quote too much, but remember, it's a gap that exists, and you can see it as plain as day on the replay from Magnussen's point of view. That is a gap that is closing. You can see where Perez is going. You can't tell me that Magnussen doesn't know which way that barrier goes. He seems like a man driving out of desperation because of all the issues that they've had in the previous Grand Prix. And yes, they've got a point or two out of that. I think all I can say is I think he deserved a ban for that. For all the incidents combined that we've seen over the last few years, it's as bad as, sorry, not few years, few weeks, as we've seen. We saw with Grosjean similarly, and I think that I hope the money from everything that was done in the previous couple of rounds, I hope that covers your repair bill, because that's what you've got to hope for. That is. Perez's car was completely destroyed, and that's not even to talk about all the marshals that were at the side. That's an area of the track, admittedly on the other side, that has a number of people because it's a street circuit. There's any number of different ways that could have gone wrong at 120 mile, 120, 140 miles an hour, and I think it was lucky it wasn't worse. Genuinely.
Yeah, strong words there from Owain, and I do sort of agree with you as well. You made a very, very good point, actually. If you think about sort of where it is, it's on a street circuit. It's it's just not a good look for anybody involved, is it? And it's no. My view on it, and just a side note, if you want to hear more 5-star takes on this, you should leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, not Google, because they're going away, Verbal Pocket Cast, all that good old stuff. I almost forgot about the segue, so there you go. Not one of my finest. But no, it's I really think the FIA are almost afraid to put a driver to the 12 penalty points, but by this stage, because if we look back at the incident, and if we look at where if we look at where K-Mag's car was, he will know that the racing line up that hill is more or less sort of straight, because the racing line, you take the path of least resistance. You don't follow it like you're driving in a road car. You go as straight as possible. And at no point was he alongside, let alone ahead of Perez. He left his front axle there, knowing that gap would close, and he left his front axle there, hoping he would get away with it, and he didn't. And he caused that collision by leaving his front axle there, if you ask me. I'm so sorry, I have hiccups, and I'm trying to stop it because we're professional here at Grid Talk. He left his front axle there with a sort of like half in, half out approach, and it was just a bit sort of lazy from him. And one of you made a good point earlier. I can't remember which one of you it was. Sorry, I think it was you, Owain, but it's 50-50, like Perez's front axle. It was he left it there, sort of hoping that he would get away with it, and he didn't, and he spun Perez off. You said earlier, George, they didn't show the replay at first because of how badly damaged that Red Bull was. We are lucky that F1 safety has got to a point where Perez is able to hop out of that car. And if you want to finish a race, you have to, what's the age-old phrase? If you want to finish first you have to finish. Now, I know they're battling at the back of the field, but the point still stands. If they want to finish, because you don't know what's going to go on in front of you for the next 77, 78 laps. If you want to, if either any of those drivers wanted to get something out of that race, and if Magnussen wants to keep his seat for next year, half sticking a wheel up the inside at Monaco is not the answer. And bearing in mind the sort of the sort of trailblazing reputation he's left himself this year, he's not doing himself any favors. And with people like Ollie Behrman, sniffing around for that seat at Haas, he was already done a really good standing this year for Ferrari a couple of months back. As the kids say, it's not looking good, Brev. And he's K-Mag, it reeks of desperation by this point, and he's becoming a bit of a liability, if you ask me. And if we want drivers to feel safe on the grid, well, we could do without a rampant sort of Danish bakery coming flying in from up the inside of Monaco when there is no gap. So on that on that note, chaps, I just want to give you a quick sort of chance to promo anything. Now I know we're all hosts here at the Lovely Grid Talk stuff. But if you'd like to give something else a shout out, please do. So George, you just want to give us a sort of executive summary or something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you want to see and hear more from me, you can go over to F1 Chronicle or Football Chronicle. We do a lot of articles. We do a lot of videos now as well, so you can catch those on all the usual social platforms. And our biggest one is Microsoft Start as well. So yeah, go and check us out on there if you want to see some more stuff from F1. I reckon I'll probably be doing another rant about Kevin Magnussen. So if you want to hear something similar to what I just said again, about why you should get a race ban, head over there.
Lovely stuff. Cheers, mate. And Owain, just tell us a bit about yourself as well.
I don't have anything to say about me, but one thing I would say is, given that some of the racing that we saw towards the back of the field was more indicative of an F2 race. If you'd like to hear about actually F2, not the guys pay the big bucks to be able to keep it out the wall or each other, then I would listen to Formula Talk, hosted by our very own Sophia Richmond, to hear about all the Formula 2 and Formula 3 action that happened this week.
Brilliant. Cheers, mate. Yes, and if you want to hear more from me, well, I don't really have social media anymore, so the only place you'll really sort of find it is here. But Good Talk is available on YouTube, where most episodes are recorded live, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Casts. Just search Formula One Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to qualifying and race results. Please consider supporting the channel on Patreon so we can get mics, lights, and better recording equipment. Also, make sure you are subscribed so you're the first to know when each new weekly episode is released. We will be back soon with plenty more F1 content, but we do have one more thing to ask, as Owain just reminded me in the Zoom chat because I'm an absolute idiot and forgot. George, who was your driver of the day?
Oh, well, to quote the great Phil Matthew, it was Charles Leclerc. You can't really go for anybody other than him. Like I said, an absolutely perfect weekend for him in his home race.
Yeah. Owain, who's your driver of the day?
I'm not going to butt the trend. It's obviously it's Charles Leclerc. He's had a Toyota moment, as it were. Broken the curse.
He has. He's absolutely finally broken the curse. And I'm going to break the trend, and I'm going to say Logan Sargent. He made it over. No, I'm not. I'm No. I am obviously going to say Charles Leclerc. He has won his home race after putting it on pole and holding out for the entirety of the race. Blah, 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 blah. So thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast presented by Best Online. Thank you for putting up with my waffling, and goodbye.